why the Middle East region has been inherently unstable for decades, and what are the future prospects of it developing into a stable, peaceful, and thriving region. Unfortunately, the answer to this question is not very easy, definitely because of the complicated dynamics of the Middle East. But if we take inspiration from Douglas Lemke's multiple hierarchy model, simplify the problem, one liner answer would be because it lacks regional dominant power that can impose order in the region. Or we can say that the power differential between the key players is not huge enough to reduce the cost of challenging the status quo. And that is why we see the frequent disruptions of the status quo. The root cause of the problem is not only because there is an absence of a clear, defined hierarchy within the region, but also because of the very complicated dynamics of the region. We are at loss in identifying the key players also. Like we can say in the current scenario, it is Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, Israel, and even Egypt, which are competing for the regional power status. But then we have UAE and Qatar, which are punching far above their weight. And then we have countries like Syria and Iraq, which had played very significant role in the past, but now war-torn and being themselves subject to the machinations of other regional powers. Even among the major players, the story is not so simple. Like, let me analyze these major regional players one by one. We can argue that Egypt of today is not in a position to lead, to play any leading role in the region because of its fragile economy, its dependence on the Gulf partners, its relations with Israel, etc. But nobody can deny that it is the most populous Arab country, the heart of Arab intellectual and ideological movements, whether it is Muslim brotherhoods or regime transitions. Whatever starts in Egypt rarely remains confined to it. We have seen that in case of pan-Arabism, peace deals with Israel, and even we have seen that all the ideological manifestations of Muslim Brotherhood can be easily traced back to Cairo. So, though only a shadow of the former past glory of Jamal Abdel Nasser, no Arab leader would still like to see Egypt land into the enemy camp. That is why when Mohammed Morsi was overthrown in a military coup by Abdel Fattah Sisi, Saudi Arabia, along with other Gulf partners, rushed to prop up the military dictator with more than $22 billion aid in grants, cash deposits, investments, etc. So I can say with conviction that without neutralizing Egypt, Israel could not have been in a position to forge peace deals with its neighbors. Or even if it did, it would not have given it any respite to further implement its regional agendas. So even a weakened Egypt cannot be written off. And when it rises again, it will have significant impact on the regional dynamics. Moving on to Turkey, which has recently changed its Qibla from Europe to Middle East, only after it was unable to gain membership of the European Union for decades. So it belatedly realized that its Muslim credentials would never entitle it to win a seat in European Union, a region which is already in grip of Islamophobia and far-right populist rhetoric. So the problem is Turkey would not be welcome in the Middle East either. Any Turkish activism in the region evokes fear of neo-Ottomanism, and its attempt to re-enter the region in the wake of the Arab Spring, its role in Libyan and Syrian civil wars, and especially the dislodging of the Bashar through Turkish-backed militias that alarmed rival powers in the Middle East. So, but nothing has dented Erdogan's popularity more than his empty rhetoric on Gaza and Palestine. So after 2010, Mavi Marmara incident, when we saw him making inroads into the Arab street by championing the cause of Palestine And he also recalled his ambassador for Israel at that time. But his contemporary silence on Gaza, genocide, and continuing trade with the apartheid regime, even after explicit declarations of halting the bilateral trade, has landed him in an embarrassing situation in the Muslim world. So no matter how much a country wants or cherishes to strengthen its relations with US, with West and Israel, the road to the Arab Street runs through Jerusalem. So I believe Turkey surely is one of the leading players, but it will not be in a position to claim the hegemon title for itself. So for a very long time, we have seen that the Middle East has been viewed through the Saudi-Iranian rivalry lens. It was generally assumed that if there is going to be anyone who can take the mantle of power in the Middle East, it had to be either of them. And this assumption was augmented with the disappearance of Saddam regime, and with him, Iraq as a strategic rival to both. Then the Arab Spring, the fall of the dictators, and the trouble it evoked in the region. This gave an ideal opportunity to both Iran and Saudi Arabia to increase their influence in the region. So the House of Saud bailed itself out of the uncomfortable situation in the Arab uprisings by doling out 130 billion package to its population, which was more than its total annual budget of 2007. It then ensured the survival of House of Khalifa in Bahrain with overt military intervention, but the war in Yemen proved to be a disaster. So in spite of quantitative and qualitative edge over the Houthis rebels, it had to extract itself from the difficult situation through Iranian mediation, and even had to accept Bashar back into its fold. And without doubt, Yemen has exposed the limits of the Saudi power in the region. But what is even more important has been the reorientation of Saudi grand strategic objectives, the rise of MBS to power, and after failed experiments to contain both Iran and Houthis, he opted for a diplomatic rapprochement with Iran and now exerts all his energies towards realizing his signature Vision 2030. What has actually baffled the Muslim mind or the Muslim world has been the backseat Saudi Arabia has taken in the year-plus genocide in Gaza, the active Houthi, Hezbollah fronts, and even the explicit absence of Saudi Arabia in the unceremonious exit of Bashar. Otherwise, one of the strongest contenders to opt for the prime slot in the Middle Eastern hierarchy, the refusal of Saudi Arabia to lead the Muslim world by taking any active mediation, its diplomatic or financial clout. It certainly is a leading economic power, but the role of hegemon entails policing the region with overt and covert military power. So the House of Saud under MBS has invested far too much in Vision 2030 to involve itself in financially draining regional conflicts. Another irony is, even then, it might emerge as the only viable regional power with resources intact after the dust settles. So one can never write off Saudi Arabia with its current status, even when the country itself chooses to remain conspicuously absent on the regional front. Iran, on the other hand, had been at the forefront of evolving regional dynamics. The region, under the Islamic regime, moved from Saudi-Iranian rivalry-centric to resistance-axis Zionist dynamics. The October 7, 2023 attack, Hamas attack on Israel, while shocking for many, was in complete sync with Iranian grand designs for the region. Hamas, being an offshoot of Muslim Brotherhood and generally a pariah for the majority of the Arab regimes, could not have orchestrated this momentous attack without taking Iran on board. Through Hamas, the Shia Islamic regime was able to transcend itself from the sectarian orientation of its Middle Eastern project. From Iraq to Syria and from Hezbollah to Houthis, the overarching Shia identity gave enough ammunition in the hands of Iranian rivals to evoke fear of a Shia crescent rising in the Middle East. That sounds like an existential threat to Sunni powers. By standing firmly behind the staunch Sunni Hamas, Iran was able to reorient its struggle for Middle East as the bunch of resistance powers rising above their sectarian orientations were united in the service of Islam, justice, and Palestine against all odds, against not only the pro-Zionist US and the West, but also the pro-Zionist Arab and Muslim world. This is a message which resonated strongly with the Arab and Muslim street, and even garnered followers in the West who, witnessing both Western and Muslim impunity in the face of Israeli barbarism, were drawn significantly towards the Palestinian cause. Iran initially seemed to be winning the narrative war by not only successful packaging of its own account, but also by the unprecedented brutality, violence, and genocide of the Zionist regime. I believe more than anything else, it was Israel and the live streaming of Gaza genocide by its occupation forces, the implementation of its escalation dominance doctrine, the complicity of mainstream Western media and governments, and the dehumanization of Palestinians that evoked fierce reaction from global activists and human rights organizations. So if there is a silver lining in the unprecedented tragedy of Gaza, it's the unmasking of Israeli propaganda and the beholden Western governments who claim to be champions of humanity and liberal values. The longer the war lasted, the more the world opinion strengthened in favor of Gaza. Had it not been for the martyrdom of Ismail Haniyeh, Yahya Sinwar, and Hassan Nasrallah, and the top leadership of Hamas and Hezbollah, Tehran, with its own myriad responses to the first ever direct confrontation between Israel and Iran, would seem to have emerged victorious against all odds. However, Israel, with its endless supply of arms and armaments, blanket support provided by the complicit Western governments, both inside and outside the UN and global bodies, was able to turn the humiliating defeat into victory. Israel has inadvertently been helped by those Muslim states too, who, instead of focusing on the Palestinian front, helped bring down Bashar al-Assad and thus removing the last obstacle on the path to the Greater Israel project. Interestingly, the former Al-Qaeda turned ISIS commander, who then headed the most notorious Al-Nusra Front, rebranded himself as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Over 10 million bounty on his head disappears overnight, and he's granted access to mainstream Western channels like CNN and BBC. This Ahmad al-Shara Abu Muhammad al-Julani then refrains from issuing a single statement against indiscriminate Israeli bombing on Syria, violations of Syrian sovereignty, and even encroachment of Syrian lands. So as we are speaking, I think they've already captured Quneitra. So instead, the HTS leader reiterates twice that New Syria would not meddle with Israel's security, as they consider only Iran and Hezbollah as their enemies. So this time, the pro-Zionist forces are not even interested in disguising their assets. But this, indeed, this is one of the biggest blows to Iranian grand designs in the region. It seems the Islamic regime's successes are in the reverse gear now. A removal of Bashar has removed the safest route to Hezbollah after the decapitation of its senior leadership, pager and walkie-talkie attacks. 100,000 strong Hezbollah has suffered grave losses. But let me be explicit. Hezbollah is the only organization that defeated Israel twice. And when I say that, I mean it effectively removed the myth of Israeli invincibility. And after months and months of ceaseless Israeli bombardments on civilian infrastructure, it was able to inflict heavy losses on the IUF forces. And when Israel realized that they cannot subdue Hezbollah, they tried to weaken it by cutting off its most reliable supply line. So how effective the strategy of replacing Bashar with al-Julani would be for Israel, only time can tell. But In the short term, we can say that Israel seemed to be on the winning streak, with all their enemies considerably weakened from where they started. However, there is one very interesting link, the enemies in Yemen. How the world's poorest nation can withstand a major global and regional powers against all odds is a story to be commemorated in legends. It has up till now denied access to Red Sea, Israel access to Red Sea, one of the world's most pivotal maritime straits. And in spite of suffering losses, has carried out dozens of ballistic missiles and drone attacks on Israel. Definitely after the removal of major players of the conflict, it would again come under the wrath of the Western powers. But up till now, it has not showed any signs of weakness and insists on standing with the Palestinians even when the whole world has abandoned them. Does this mean that Israel now is in a position to emerge as the hegemon in the region and rewrite the rules for the regional governance? Fortunately for the Arab world, in spite of all the backing it gets from the West and the West-inclined regional governments, its Abraham Accords, liquidation of Hamas and Hezbollah leadership, removal of Bashar with the most blind jihadist turned revolutionaries, its desire to rule the Muslim Middle East is still a wishful thinking. Not because of countries like Iran and Yemen or organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas who are committed to Israeli destruction as long as they are surviving, but because of the implacable hatred of the Muslim street and especially Arab street towards the illegal Zionist colonial project. Even in its weakest form, this has acted as deterrent and forced regimes like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan to pay lip service to the two-state solution. In the end, to sum up answer to the question, in spite of all the cold and hot wars in the Middle East, the region still lacks a player strong enough to bring peace and stability. Whoever strives to come to the top will have to grapple with the question of Palestine. And without successful resolution of this decades-long simmering conflict, the region will remain embroiled in chaos and instability. And as for the question, what are the implications of this potentially explosive region for Pakistan? There are both opportunities and challenges. And while on the one hand, major geopolitical shifts like normalizations of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia can reduce sectarian tensions both domestically and regionally. On the other hand, intensification of power struggle among key players could complicate Pakistan's regional diplomacy efforts. Similarly, we face a dilemma in Chinese versus Indian increased involvement in the Middle East. So the former enhances Pakistan's strategic position and economic ties, particularly in energy security. Its increasing role as a mediator in the region also aligns with Pakistan's interests, potentially enhancing its geopolitical position, while India's growing influence in the Gulf could challenge our traditional alliances with Arab states. Besides, as more Muslim-majority nations normalize ties with Israel, this could lead to a potential shift in Pakistan's long-standing non-recognition policy, particularly if it seeks to counterbalance India's growing partnership with Israel. However, Pakistan must navigate these changes carefully to safeguard its national interests amid shifting alliances. So there are other economic benefits also, but I think I've already exceeded my time. Thank you so much.